When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the war ended for millions of Japanese soldiers. Some were on islands across the Pacific. Others were retreating from battlefields in China and Southeast Asia. Many were trying to make their way home through ruined ports and crowded train stations. But for nearly 600,000 Japanese soldiers, surrender did not bring peace. These were the men captured by the Soviet Union in the final days of the war. They were shipped across Siberia, scattered through remote labor camps, and forced into years of brutal, exhausting work. For many, the war did not end in 1945. Their struggle continued deep inside a foreign land, under conditions they had never imagined. Today we explore what happened to these men, how they were captured, what life was like inside Soviet camps, how many survived, how they returned home, and how their experience shaped the post-war relationship between Japan and the Soviet Union. This is a story often overlooked in World War II history, yet it affected hundreds of thousands of families and left deep scars that lasted for generations. In the summer of 1945, the Japanese Kwantung Army was stationed across Manchuria, a vast region then under Japanese control. For years, the Kwantung Army had been considered one of Japan's strongest forces. But by 1945, it was a shadow of its former self. Experienced troops had been sent elsewhere. Supplies were running low. Many units were filled with young conscripts. On the 9th of August, only days before Japan surrendered, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched a massive invasion of Manchuria. Soviet tanks, aircraft, and infantry pushed through with overwhelming speed. Japanese forces were unprepared. Many surrendered within hours. Others fled in confusion. Civilians tried to escape by train or on foot. The war ended in Japan on the 15th of August, but the fighting in Manchuria continued for days as Soviet forces expanded their control. By the time resistance collapsed, the Soviets had captured roughly 500,000 Japanese soldiers, along with tens of thousands of Japanese civilians. These men assumed they would be held temporarily and then returned home. They did not expect what came next. Instead of releasing their prisoners, the Soviets transported them deep into their own territory. Trains crowded with Japanese soldiers traveled north from Manchuria, through Siberia, the Urals, and even into European parts of the Soviet Union. The journey alone was a harsh introduction to what awaited them. Prisoners were packed into cattle cars. There was little food. Water was scarce. Sanitation was almost non-existent. Many were sick from malnutrition even before being captured. Some died during the journey. Others tried to keep their spirits up by singing or sharing stories, even though no one knew where they were being taken. When the trains finally stopped, prisoners found themselves at labor camps spread across some of the coldest regions on Earth. Their internment had begun. The Japanese prisoners were placed into the Soviet Gulag system. These were not ordinary camps. They were part of a vast forced labor network designed to support Soviet industry and rebuild regions devastated by the war. Japanese POWs were assigned to tasks such as surveying mining coal, forging timber and constructing railroads, surveying quarrying stone, repairing factories, find clearing war, debris on digging. Canals the work was grueling. Hours were long. Food rations depended on performance. Prisoners who worked more received larger portions. Those who struggled received smaller ones, which often led to a vicious cycle of starvation. Winters in Siberia were brutal. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Clothing was inadequate. Frostbite was common. Men burned anything they could find for warmth. Some slept near stoves, risking burns because the cold was unbearable. Despite the harshness, prisoners found ways to survive mentally. They organized small cultural groups. They shared memories of home. Some sketched in notebooks. Others practiced quiet, religious rituals. These moments helped them maintain a sense of humanity inside a system designed to break them. But even with these efforts, the death toll was severe. The main causes of death in the camps were exposure, malnutrition, disease, and exhaustion. Common illnesses included tuberculosis, dysentery, pneumonia, frostbite infections, vitamin deficiencies. Medical care was limited. Prison camp hospitals existed, but supplies were scarce. Doctors did what they could, but most relied on basic treatments like hot water, bandages, and rest. Prisoners who could not work were often punished, not helped. The Soviet system valued labor above all else. Despite the suffering, many Japanese soldiers formed close bonds. They helped each other survive. They shared scraps of food. They guarded sick comrades. They tried to keep morale alive by teaching each other songs, poems, and academic subjects. These bonds became essential. Without them, survival rates would have been far lower. Why were Japanese soldiers held so long? The Soviets had several reasons. One, labor scarcity. After the war, the Soviet Union suffered immense destruction during the war. Entire cities were damaged. Railways needed rebuilding. Mines needed workers. Japanese POWs became a source of free labor. 2. Political messaging. The Soviet government wanted to demonstrate victory over Japan, a major Axis power. Keeping Japanese soldiers in camps reinforced that message. 3. Negotiating leverage. Holding prisoners gave the Soviets bargaining power in post-war talks, especially with Japan's future government. 4. Ideological goals. Soviet authorities also used the camps to teach Marxist-Leninist ideology. They believed some prisoners could be converted and later influence Japanese society. Several hundred Japanese POWs were indeed drawn into pro-Soviet groups. Some remained in the Soviet Union after release. Others joined leftist movements upon returning to Japan. But most prisoners did not adopt Soviet ideology. They simply wanted to go home. Japan regained sovereignty in 1952, but many Japanese prisoners were still in the Soviet Union. The process of repatriation began in stages. At first, the Soviets released small groups. Some returned in 1946. More came home in 1947 and 1948, but thousands remained in camps far into the early 1950s. Japanese families waited anxiously. Mothers kept photos by the door, hoping for a knock. Wives carried the weight of raising children alone. Children grew up without fathers. Every few months, a list of returning prisoners was published. Families rushed to read the names. For some, it was joyful. For others, it was heartbreaking. When prisoners were finally released, they traveled by train to ports in the Soviet Far East. From there, they boarded ships bound for Maizuru, a coastal city in Japan that became the main arrival point. Maizuru became known as the port of hope and sorrow. Families gathered there daily. Every ship brought mixed emotions. Fighting reunions soin tears soin relief. For those who never returned, it is estimated that around 60,000 Japanese POWs died in Soviet captivity. Many families never learned where or how their relatives died. Soldiers who returned from the Soviet Union faced a difficult transition. Japan had changed dramatically. The American occupation had ended. A new constitution was in place. Society had moved on in ways they could not have imagined. Returning POWs faced several challenges. 1. Physical health problems. Many were underweight. Some had chronic health issues from malnutrition. Others carried long-term injuries from harsh labor. Psychological trauma. Life in the camps left deep emotional scars. Some men had nightmares for decades. Others struggled with guilt for surviving when so many comrades did not. 3. Social stigma. Not everyone welcomed them warmly. Some people believed POWs were weak for surrendering. Others thought they had been influenced by communist ideology. These suspicions created social barriers. 4. Difficulty finding work. Japan was rebuilding, but jobs were competitive. Former POWs often had gaps in their work history and limited training outside the military. Despite these hardships, many rebuilt their lives. Some became teachers, craftsmen, or laborers. Others entered politics or joined movements advocating for the rights of former POWs. For many years, the Japanese government did not emphasize the stories of POWs held by the Soviets. It was a sensitive topic during the Cold War. There were diplomatic considerations. There was also a cultural reluctance to discuss surrender. But beginning in the 1970s and 1980s, survivors began sharing their experiences more openly. Memoirs were published. Documentaries were filmed. Museums at Maizuru and other locations collected artifacts and testimonies. Unknown of the most valuable sources of history came from diaries that soldiers had hidden in camp. Many wrote secretly on scrap paper or carved notes into wood. These personal accounts now provide a detailed look into daily life in the camps. They reveal moments of tide hunger, tide kindness, despair, thidarity, thundidi unexpected humor, summer quiet hope. These diaries kept their humanity alive. Several thousand Japanese soldiers captured by the Soviets did not return to Japan after the war. Their reasons varied. Ana. Death in the camps, this was the largest group. Disease, starvation, accidents, and harsh labor conditions took a heavy toll. 2. Relocation within the Soviet Union. Some prisoners were absorbed into Soviet society. They worked in factories, farms, or construction sites. Their descendants still live in Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other former Soviet republics. 3. Political conversion. A very small number became committed communists. They stayed in the Soviet Union voluntarily or moved to communist-controlled areas of China. Some later returned to Japan as activists. 4. Lost identities in rare cases. Prisoners lost their documentation, were recorded under incorrect names, or died with no records. Their families never knew their fate. The issue of POWs became a long-term diplomatic problem between Japan and the Soviet Union. Discussions about compensation, responsibility, and access to records stretched on for decades. It was not until the late 20th century that both sides reached a clearer understanding. Joint research projects uncovered burial sites. Families gained access to documents previously withheld. Memorials were erected in Siberia and Japan. The legacy remains complicated. The Soviet Union no longer exists, and modern Russia inherited both the historical responsibility and the diplomatic burden. Japan continues to honor the memory of those who never returned. In recent years, the last surviving POWs have grown old. Many have dedicated their remaining years to sharing their stories. They speak at schools, community centers, and memorial events. They want younger generations to understand the harsh reality of war and captivity. Their stories emphasize resilience, frontier and compassion among prisoners, the value of peace wine, the need to remember forgotten chapters of history. These voices have shaped the modern understanding of the Soviet POW experience. Without them, much of this history would remain hidden. The story of Japanese soldiers captured by the Soviets after World War II is a story of endurance in the face of overwhelming hardship. These men survived freezing winters, brutal labor, illness, hunger, and uncertainty. They lived far from home, isolated from their families and from the world that was rebuilding without them. Their suffering continued long after the war ended. Their return was slow. Their reintegration was difficult. Their memories were often painful. Yet their perseverance shaped Japan's post-war identity and added a deeper layer to the history of World War II. Their experience reminds us that war does not end cleanly. It leaves long shadows. It carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. And it affects the lives of people who often go unnoticed in history books. The Japanese POWs in the Soviet Union endured one of the harshest post-war experiences faced by any group of soldiers. Their story deserves to be told, remembered, and understood.